The lantern's flame danced shadows across the stable floor as Thomas Everett pushed open the heavy wooden door, the November wind of 1873 howling behind him like a wounded animal. What he found nestled in the fresh hay of his finest mare's stall made him freeze mid-step, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip before his eyes adjusted to make sense of the small figure curled there. A woman, her dark hair matted with dirt and what looked like dried blood, her dress torn and mud-caked, lay so still he thought for a moment she might be dead until he saw the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Thomas knelt beside her, his weathered hands surprisingly gentle as he checked for injuries. She was young, perhaps early 20s, and even through the grime he could see she had been beautiful before whatever hell had brought her to his stable. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her skin pale as milk except for the angry bruises mottling her arms and neck. He started to lift her, thinking to carry her to the main house, when her eyes flew open, wild and terrified, the color of storm clouds before a twister. She scrambled backward into the hay, her breath coming in panicked gasps, and Thomas raised both hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and steady like he was talking to a spooked horse. "You are on my property, but I will not hurt you. You are safe here." The woman's eyes darted around the stable, taking in the horses in their stalls, the tools hanging on the walls, the lantern light flickering across Thomas's face. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out at first, her throat working uselessly until finally she managed to croak, "Please, just one more night." Thomas tilted his head, studying her. "One more night in my stable," she nodded, tears streaming down her dirty cheeks. "I will be gone by morning." "I promise. I just need somewhere safe, just tonight, please." He should have said no. A rancher living alone could not afford the complications a strange woman might bring, especially not in Fort Kearny, Nebraska, where gossip spread faster than wildfire and reputations could be destroyed with a single rumor. But something in her eyes, some desperate plea that went beyond words, made him nod slowly. "All right, one night, but you will come up to the house where it is warm and I will get you some food and water. You look half dead." "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "Here, I need to stay here. In case I need to run." "Run from what?" Thomas asked, but she just pressed her lips together and looked away. He sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of her jaw. "Fine, but I am bringing you blankets and food. You will freeze to death out here otherwise, and I will not have that on my conscience." He returned to the house, his mind racing with questions. The woman had the look of someone who had been traveling hard and fast, someone running from something or someone. The bruises on her neck looked like finger marks, and his jaw clenched at the thought. Thomas Everett was 30 years old, had built his ranch from nothing after returning from the war, and he had seen enough violence and cruelty to last several lifetimes. He had no patience for men who hurt women. When he came back with blankets, bread, dried beef, and a canteen of water, she was sitting up, her back against the stable wall, watching the door like she expected the devil himself to come through it. She flinched when he approached, and he moved slowly, setting everything down within her reach before backing away. "Thank you," she whispered, and her voice was hoarse but had a softness to it that made something in his chest tighten unexpectedly. "What is your name?" he asked. She hesitated for so long he thought she would not answer. "Delilah," she finally said. "Delilah Lawson. Thomas Everett. This is my ranch. I run cattle mostly, some horses." He did not know why he was telling her this, but the silence felt too heavy otherwise. "How did you end up in my stable, Miss Lawson?" Delilah reached for the water, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the canteen. She drank deeply, water spilling down her chin, and when she lowered it, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. I walked. Been walking for 3 days, I think, maybe 4, I lost track. Walked from where? East, toward the river. She tore off a piece of bread and ate it slowly, like her stomach had forgotten how to accept food. There was a wagon train. My husband was taking me west to California. Said he had a claim waiting there, a chance to start fresh. Her voice went flat, emotionless. He lied about a lot of things. Thomas waited, sensing there was more. He was not a good man, Delilah continued, staring at the bread in her hands. I knew that before I married him, but I did not have much choice. My parents died of fever last year, left me with nothing but debts. Robert said he would take care of me, give me a home. Instead, he beat me every night for the smallest things. Wrong tone of voice. Food not hot enough. Looking at another man too long. She touched her throat unconsciously. 3 nights ago, he came at me with a knife. Said I was not worth the trouble, that he was going to kill me and tell the others. I ran off. I fought him, got the knife away, and I ran. Did you kill him? Thomas asked quietly. I do not know. He was bleeding when I left him, but I did not stay to find out if he would live or die. I just ran into the darkness and kept running. She looked up at him then, her eyes fierce despite the tears. I am not sorry. Even if he is dead, I am not sorry. I am not asking you to be, Thomas said. He understood survival, understood doing what needed to be done when the choice was between living and dying. But you need to know, if there are men looking for you, they will search the ranches in the area. Fort Kearney is not a big town. Strangers get noticed. I know. That is why I just need 1 night. By morning I will be gone and you can forget I was ever here. Thomas stood, brushing hay from his pants. Get some rest. We will talk more in the morning. He left her there, but sleep eluded him that night. He kept thinking about Delilah Lawson in his stable, about the bruises on her throat and the desperate courage it must have taken to fight off a man intent on killing her. He thought about his own past, about the things he had done during the war that still haunted his dreams, about how he had come to Nebraska precisely because it was empty and far from the memories that chased him. When dawn broke cold and gray, he went to the stable expecting to find it empty, expecting that Delilah had slipped away in the night like she said she would. Instead, she was still there, curled up in the blankets, sleeping so deeply he could tell exhaustion had finally claimed her completely. Her face in sleep looked younger, more vulnerable, and Thomas felt that strange tightening in his chest again. He was feeding the horses when she finally stirred, sitting up with a gasp and looking around wildly until her eyes found him, and some of the panic left her face. "Morning," he said, keeping his tone casual. "There is a pump out back of the house if you want to wash up. I can spare some clothes that might fit, old things from when my sister visited. She is about your size. You have been very kind already. I should go." "Go where?" Thomas asked bluntly. "You have no supplies, no horse, no money, I would wager. You will not make it another day on foot, especially with winter coming on. And if your husband is alive and looking for you, you will be an easy target alone on the road." Delilah wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "What are you suggesting? Stay, work for me. I can use help around the ranch and it will give you time to figure out what you want to do next. I will pay you wages, give you a room in the house. Nothing improper," he added quickly, seeing the wariness in her eyes. "There is a spare bedroom. You will have privacy." "Why would you do that for me? You do not know me. I could be lying about everything." Thomas shrugged. "Maybe, but I do not think you are. And even if you were, I have been alone on this ranch for 5 years. Having another person around, someone to help with the work, that would not be the worst thing." He paused, then added more honestly, "And I do not like the idea of sending you back out there with men possibly hunting you." I spent 4 years fighting in the war, and I did my share of things I am not proud of. Maybe this is a chance to balance the scales a little." Delilah studied him for a long moment, and Thomas met her gaze steadily. He was not a handsome man, he knew that. His face was too angular, too marked by sun and wind and hard living. His dark hair had threads of gray despite his age, and his green eyes had seen too much death to ever be truly warm again. But he was honest, and he hoped she could see that. "All right," she said finally. "I will stay. For a while, until I can figure out what to do next." The first weeks were awkward. Delilah was skittish as a wild deer, jumping at sudden noises and watching the road constantly as if expecting riders to appear at any moment. Thomas gave her space, showed her the work that needed doing, the chickens to feed, the garden to tend before the frost killed everything, the mending and cooking and cleaning that had piled up in his bachelor existence. She was a hard worker, he discovered. Despite her obvious fear and exhaustion, she threw herself into the tasks with determination. She cooked better than he expected, real meals with flavor and care, not the basic sustenance he had been surviving on. She mended his torn shirts with neat, precise stitches. She sang sometimes while she worked, soft melodies he did not recognize, and the sound made the ranch house feel less empty. Thomas found himself watching her more than he should, noticing small things. The way she braided her hair each morning, the dark waves falling past her shoulders when she let it down at night. The careful way she moved, like someone still expecting blows. The rare smile that crossed her face when one of the chickens did something amusing. A smile that transformed her completely and made his heart do strange things in his chest. He was falling for her. He knew it and tried to fight it because she was vulnerable and scared, and taking advantage of that would make him no better than the husband she had fled. So he kept his distance, kept their interactions polite and professional, even as he found himself lying awake at night thinking about her sleeping just down the hall. November gave way to December, and with it came the first serious snow. Thomas was in the barn repairing a broken stall door when Delilah came rushing in, her face pale. "There are riders coming. 3 men." Thomas dropped his tools and moved to the window, peering out at the road. Sure enough, 3 horsemen were approaching, their forms dark against the white landscape. "Did you recognize them?" "I could not see clearly enough. But what if it is Robert? What if he is looking for me? Then we will deal with it." Thomas checked his revolver, made sure it was loaded. "Go to the house. If there is trouble, you run. Take my spare horse from the back corral and ride north. There is a widow named Mrs. Henderson about 10 miles up the road. Tell her I sent you and she will help you. Thomas, I cannot let you fight my battles." He looked at her, really looked at her, and the fear in her eyes made something fierce and protective surge through him. "You are not letting me do anything. I am choosing to stand between you and harm because that is what decent people do. Now go." She hesitated, then grabbed his hand briefly, squeezed it. "Be careful." And then she was gone, running through the snow toward the house. Thomas walked out to meet the riders, his hand resting casually on his gun. As they got closer, he relaxed slightly. These were not desperate men hunting a woman. These were travelers, their clothes dusty and worn, their horses tired. The one in front raised a hand in greeting. "Afternoon. We are looking for Fort Kearney. Are we headed right?" "Straight ahead, about 6 more miles," Thomas said. "You will see the settlement once you clear the next rise." "Much obliged." The man tipped his hat. "Cold day to be out." "That it is. Safe travels to you." They rode on, and Thomas watched until they disappeared before heading back to the house. He found Delilah standing at the window, still pale, her hands gripping the curtain. "Just travelers," he said. "Nothing to worry about." She turned to him and something in her expression had changed. "You would have fought for me. If it had been Robert, you would have stood against him." "Yes," Thomas said simply, because there was no point denying it. Why? He considered lying, making up some noble reason about duty or honor, but he was tired of pretending, tired of keeping the wall up between them. "Because the thought of anyone hurting you makes me want to break things. Because these past weeks with you here have been the best I have had in years. Because I think I am falling in love with you, Delilah. And I know I have no right to feel that way, but I cannot seem to help it." The silence stretched between them, heavy and loaded, and Thomas braced himself for rejection. Instead, Delilah crossed the room and took his hand, the same way she had in the barn, but this time she did not let go. "I was so afraid it was just me," she whispered. "I thought I was crazy for feeling this way after everything that happened with Robert. But you are nothing like him. You are kind and patient, and you make me feel safe. I have not felt safe in so long, Thomas." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face gently. "I will never hurt you. I swear that on everything I hold sacred." "I know," she said, and then she was kissing him, tentative at first but growing bolder when he responded carefully, mindful of not overwhelming her. It was a gentle kiss, full of promise and new beginnings, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. The relationship developed slowly after that, Thomas always letting Delilah set the pace, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. They held hands while walking to check the cattle. They sat close by the fire in the evenings, reading or talking about their pasts. She told him about growing up in Ohio, about her parents and the small farm they had worked until the fever took them. He told her about the war, about the things he had seen and done, the friends he had lost, the nightmares that still came sometimes in the dark. Christmas approached, and Delilah insisted on making it special. She baked pies with the preserved fruit from the cellar, made decorations from pine branches and ribbons she found in his sister's trunk. On Christmas Eve, they sat by the fire and exchanged small gifts. He gave her a new shawl he had ridden into town to buy, soft wool in deep blue. She gave him a shirt she had sewn, the stitches perfect and even. "I have not had a real Christmas in 3 years," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "Thank you for this. Thank you for being here," he replied, kissing the top of her head, "for staying past that one night. Are you glad I asked for just one more night? It was the best request anyone has ever made of me." January brought a blizzard that trapped them inside for days. The world outside became a white void, the wind screaming around the house like tortured spirits. Thomas made sure the animals were secure, that they had enough wood and food. And then there was nothing to do but wait it out. Being confined together in the small house could have been difficult, but instead it felt natural. They cooked together, played cards, talked for hours about everything and nothing. One night, as the storm raged outside, Delilah looked at him across the table and said, "I want to tell you what really happened, all of it." Thomas set down his cards. "You do not have to. I want to. You deserve to know what you are getting involved with." She told him then about Robert Lawson, about how he had seemed charming at first, a solution to her desperate situation. How the mask had slipped on their wedding night when he hit her for the first time, claiming she had disrespected him. How it had only gotten worse from there, the beatings becoming more frequent, more brutal. How she had tried to run once before and he had tracked her down, dragged her back, broken her arm as punishment. The wagon train was his idea, she said, her voice steady but her hands shaking. Said we would start over in California. But I knew he would never change. When he came at me with that knife, when I saw my death in his eyes, something in me just snapped. I fought like I had never fought before. I got the knife and I cut him, slashed his arm and then his chest. There was so much blood. He fell and I ran. I took nothing but the clothes on my back and I ran into the darkness." "You think he survived?" "I honestly do not know. Part of me hopes he did not, and that makes me feel like a terrible person. But mostly I just hope he is not coming after me." Thomas reached across the table and took both her hands in his. "You are not a terrible person. You are a survivor. And if he does come, if he is alive and tracking you, he will have to go through me. I mean that, Delilah. I will protect you with everything I have." Tears streamed down her face. "I do not want you to have to. I do not want my past to put you in danger. Too late. I am already in this and I am not going anywhere." He stood, came around the table and pulled her up into his arms. She buried her face against his chest and cried great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. And he just held her, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances, until the storm inside her subsided like the one outside eventually would. That night, she came to his room. He was lying awake, listening to the wind when his door creaked open and Delilah slipped inside wearing her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. "I do not want to be alone," she said quietly. "Can I stay with you? Just to sleep. I just want to feel safe." "Of course," Thomas said, pulling back the covers. She climbed in beside him and he wrapped his arms around her, her back to his chest, protective and warm. She fell asleep almost immediately, but Thomas stayed awake a while longer, savoring the trust she was showing him, the way she fit perfectly against him. When the blizzard finally passed, leaving the world transformed under 3 feet of snow, they ventured outside together to check on the animals and start digging out. The cattle had survived in their shelter, the horses were fine, and the chickens in their coop were irritated but unharmed. Everything was white and pristine and beautiful, and Delilah laughed as she threw a snowball at Thomas, hitting him square in the chest. He retaliated, chasing her around the yard as she shrieked with laughter, her face flushed and happy in a way he had never seen before. They ended up collapsed in a snow bank, breathing hard, grinning at each other like children. He leaned over and kissed her, cold lips warming against each other, and in that moment, Thomas thought he had never been happier in his entire life. February arrived, and with it a visitor that changed everything. Thomas was in town picking up supplies when he heard the news. A man had been found dead near the river, frozen and partially eaten by animals. He had been there for months, since sometime in the fall. They identified him by the papers in his pocket as Robert Lawson, traveling west with a wagon train. Thomas felt something between his shoulders relax that he had not even realized was tense. He finished his business in town quickly and rode home faster than was probably wise, eager to tell Delilah the news. He found her in the kitchen, kneading bread dough, and the domestic sight made his heart swell. "Delilah, I have news. They found a body near the river. It was Robert. He has been dead since November. You are free. He is never coming after you." The bread dough fell from her hands as her knees gave out. Thomas caught her before she hit the floor, holding her tight as she shook. "Are you certain?" she gasped. "Are you absolutely certain?" "Yes." They identified him from his papers. "He is dead, Delilah. He can never hurt you again." She cried then, but these were different tears, tears of relief and release and the unburdening of months of fear. When she finally composed herself, she looked up at Thomas with red-rimmed eyes and said, "I can stay, really stay. I do not have to keep looking over my shoulder." "You can stay as long as you want," Thomas said. "Forever if you will have me." "Is that a proposal, Thomas Everett?" He had not meant it that way, at least not consciously, but now that the words were out he realized he meant them completely. "It could be. If you want it to be. I know it is fast, and I know you have been through hell, and I will understand if you need more time. But I love you, Delilah Lawson. I love your strength and your courage and the way you sing while you cook, and the way you make this house feel like a home. I want to marry you if you will have me." Delilah cupped his face in her flour-dusted hands. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Thomas. You saved my life that night in the stable, and you have been saving it every day since. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." They married in March, a simple ceremony in the Fort Kearney church with a handful of Thomas's friends and neighbors as witnesses. Delilah wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Thomas bought her, pale green that brought out the gray in her eyes. Thomas wore his best suit, his hair freshly cut, his hands shaking slightly as he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger. The reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and when Thomas kissed her, it felt like a promise, like the sealing of a bond that would last through whatever trials the future might bring. They celebrated with a meal at the boarding house, nothing fancy but filled with good food and better company. And that night, Thomas carried Delilah over the threshold of the ranch house that was now truly theirs together. Their wedding night was tender and patient, Thomas taking his time to show Delilah that love could be gentle, that a man's touch did not have to bring pain. She cried a little, overwhelmed by the difference, and he kissed away her tears and made love to her slowly until she was gasping with pleasure instead of fear. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, and Delilah traced patterns on his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For showing me what marriage should be, what love should be, for being patient with me." "You never have to thank me for loving you," Thomas said, pulling her closer. "That is the easiest thing I have ever done." The seasons turned, and their life together found a rhythm. Delilah proved to be as good a rancher's wife as Thomas had hoped, working beside him in the fields and with the cattle, never complaining about the hard work or long hours. She expanded the garden, started raising more chickens, began making butter and cheese to sell in town. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts in a way it never had when Thomas worked alone. By summer, Delilah was pregnant. Thomas found out when he came in from mending fences and found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing with a strange expression on her face. Fear shot through him immediately. "What is wrong? Are you hurt?" "I am pregnant," she said, and he could not read her tone. "I am going to have a baby." Thomas dropped to his knees in front of her, taking her hands. "That is wonderful news, is it not?" "I do not know," Delilah admitted, and now he could hear the fear in her voice. "My mother died having me. So many women die in childbirth. And what if I am a terrible mother? What if I do not know how to love a child the right way?" "You will be an amazing mother," Thomas said firmly. "I have seen how gentle you are with the animals, how patient, and you will not die. I will not let you. We will get the best doctor, do everything right. You are going to be fine, and we are going to have a beautiful baby." "You really think so?" "I know so." He kissed her hands, then her belly, already imagining the life growing inside her. "We are going to be a family, Delilah, a real family." The pregnancy was not easy. Delilah was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep anything down. Thomas took over most of the household tasks, cooking simple meals that would not upset her stomach, handling the laundry and cleaning while she rested. As she moved into her second trimester, the sickness faded but was replaced by exhaustion and aches. Her belly swelled, and Thomas watched in wonder and concern as her body changed to accommodate their growing child. In November, almost exactly 1 year after that night in the stable, Delilah went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that lasted nearly 20 hours, and Thomas paced outside the bedroom where the doctor and a midwife attended to his wife, his heart in his throat every time he heard her scream. He had faced enemy soldiers without flinching, had stared down cattle stampedes and winter storms, but nothing had ever terrified him like the thought of losing Delilah. Finally, as dawn broke on the second day, he heard the thin, wavering cry of a baby. Thomas burst into the room to find Delilah exhausted but alive, cradling a tiny bundle against her chest. The midwife smiled at him. "You have a son, Mr. Everett, a healthy baby boy." Thomas approached the bed slowly, overwhelmed by the sight of his wife and child. Delilah looked up at him with tired eyes but a radiant smile. "Meet our son," she said softly. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never settled on anything definitive. Looking down at the tiny, perfect face of his son, Thomas felt the weight of responsibility and love crash over him. "What about Daniel?" he suggested. "After your father." Delilah's eyes filled with tears. "Daniel Everett, I love it. Hello, Daniel. Welcome to the world, little one." Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, putting his arm around his wife and staring down at their son in awe. Daniel had a shock of dark hair like Delilah and what looked like it might be Thomas's nose. His tiny fist waved in the air, grasping at nothing, and when Thomas offered his finger, the baby's hand closed around it with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Thomas breathed. "You did so well, Delilah. You are amazing." "I was so scared," she admitted, leaning against him. "But I kept thinking about you, about our life together, about how I wanted to meet this little person we made. And I kept fighting." "That is what you do best," Thomas said, kissing her temple. "Fight and survive and come out stronger on the other side." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Daniel was a fussy baby, prone to crying at all hours, and Thomas and Delilah took turns walking him around the house in the middle of the night, singing to him and rocking him until he settled. Thomas discovered a patience in himself he had not known existed, a willingness to sacrifice sleep and peace and quiet for the sake of this tiny person who depended on them completely. Delilah took to motherhood with a fierce protectiveness that sometimes bordered on anxiety. She worried constantly that something would happen to Daniel, checking on him obsessively while he slept, panicking if he so much as sneezed. Thomas had to gently remind her that babies were sturdier than they looked, that every little thing was not a crisis. Gradually, as Daniel thrived and grew, her anxiety eased into something more manageable. By Daniel's first birthday, the ranch was doing better than ever. Thomas had expanded his herd, hired on a couple of ranch hands to help with the work, and was making a comfortable living. Delilah had her garden and her chickens and her cheese making, and between them, they had built something solid and lasting. They celebrated Daniel's birthday with a small party, inviting some of the neighbors and their children. Thomas watched Delilah laughing with the other women, their son on her hip, and marveled at how far they had both come. From that desperate woman sleeping in his stable to this confident, happy wife and mother seemed like an impossible transformation, but it had happened day by day, moment by moment, built on trust and love and hard work. That night, after Daniel was asleep and they had cleaned up from the party, Thomas and Delilah sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Nebraska sky in shades of orange and pink. She leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders, and sighed contentedly. "I was thinking about that night," she said. "The night you found me in your stable. I think about it all the time," Thomas admitted. "How different my life would be if I had just sent you away, if I had not taken a chance on a strange woman hiding in my barn." "I was so scared," Delilah remembered. "I thought you might turn me in or hurt me or send me back out into the cold. When you said I could stay, I could not believe it. And when you offered me work, a place here, I thought it was too good to be true, that something had to go wrong. But it did not. No, instead I found you, I found home, I found everything I thought I had lost forever." She turned to look at him, her eyes soft with emotion. "I love you so much, Thomas. Thank you for giving me that one more night. Thank you for giving me every night since." He kissed her, deep and sweet, tasting of love and promise and the life they had built together. "You never have to thank me. Loving you, building this life with you, raising our son together, it is the greatest privilege of my life." The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Daniel grew from a baby into a toddler, then into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, wanting to help with every task on the ranch. Thomas taught him to ride, to rope, to care for the animals with patience and respect. Delilah taught him to read from the Bible and the handful of books they owned, instilling in him a love of learning that would serve him well. When Daniel was 4, Delilah became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and when the time came, she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Sarah. Daniel was enchanted by his little sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help take care of her. Thomas watched his family grow with a heart so full, he sometimes thought it might burst. Sarah proved to be a calmer baby than Daniel had been, content to sleep and eat and observe the world with solemn brown eyes. As she grew, she developed her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet strength. The house was full of noise and chaos and love, and Thomas thought often about how close he had come to missing all of this. If he had turned Delilah away that night, if he had hardened his heart against her plea for just one more night, none of this would exist. By the time Daniel was 10 and Sarah was 6, the ranch had grown significantly. Thomas had built a larger barn, expanded the house to include more bedrooms, and hired on several full-time hands to help manage the increased workload. They were prosperous and respected in the community, known for their fair dealing and hard work. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Delilah said, "Do you remember what you told me the first morning, when you said I could stay?" Thomas thought back. "I said I could use the help, that it would give you time to figure out what you wanted to do next. And you said you had been alone on the ranch for 5 years, that having another person around would not be the worst thing." She smiled at him. "You were so careful not to pressure me. So determined to make it clear you were just offering work, nothing more. I did not want to scare you away, though I think I was already half in love with you even then and trying not to admit it to myself." "I knew," Delilah said. "I could see it in the way you looked at me. It terrified me at first because I did not know if I could ever trust a man again. But you were so patient. You let me come to you in my own time. You never pushed or demanded." Thomas reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after years of practice. "You were worth waiting for. You are worth everything. We built something good here," Delilah said, looking out at the land, at the children, at the life they had created. "Something real and lasting. And it all started with me sleeping in your stable and you being kind enough to give me just one more night." "Best night of my life," Thomas said, even though I did not know it then. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land, their children's laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Thomas thought about the man he had been before that November night in 1873, alone and haunted, going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. And then he thought about the man he had become, with a wife he adored and children who filled his days with purpose and joy. Daniel came running up to the porch then, his face flushed from playing. "Papa, Sarah says I cannot teach her to rope, but I am good enough now. I have been practicing. Can I show her? If your mother says it is all right," Thomas said, deferring to Delilah. "Just be careful," Delilah cautioned, "and only with the practice post, not with any actual animals yet." Daniel whooped and ran back to his sister, already explaining what he was going to teach her. Thomas and Delilah exchanged amused glances. Their son had his father's patience, but his mother's fierce determination, a combination that would serve him well in life. As the twilight deepened into night, they called the children in for supper. The meal was simple but hearty, and afterward the family sat together in the living room. Thomas read aloud from a book of adventure stories while Sarah sat on his lap and Daniel sprawled on the floor, both children listening with rapt attention. Delilah sat in her rocking chair, mending a torn shirt, glancing up occasionally to smile at her family. This was happiness, Thomas thought. Not the dramatic, overwhelming kind, but the quiet, steady kind that came from years of building something together, from choosing each other every day, from creating a safe space where love could grow and flourish. It was in these ordinary moments, these everyday scenes of family life, that he felt most grateful for that night in the stable, for Delilah's desperate plea for just one more night that had turned into a lifetime together. After the children were tucked into bed, Thomas and Delilah retired to their own room. They got ready for sleep in comfortable silence, the routine of years making words unnecessary. But before they climbed into bed, Delilah turned to Thomas and wrapped her arms around him. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "What is it?" he asked, a flutter of concern in his stomach. She pulled back to look at him and he saw that she was smiling. "I am pregnant again. I just realized today. We are going to have another baby." Joy flooded through Thomas, so intense it almost brought tears to his eyes. "Another baby," he repeated, his hands moving to her still flat stomach. "Delilah, that is wonderful. How do you feel about it?" "Scared," she admitted, "but also happy. I love our family. I love the life we have built. And I want to add to it. I want our house to be full of children and love and laughter." "Then that is exactly what we will have," Thomas promised, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you so much. You have given me everything I never knew I needed." This third pregnancy was perhaps the easiest of all. Delilah was older now, more experienced, more confident in her body and what it was doing. She continued working almost up until the day she went into labor, refusing to be treated like an invalid. In late spring, she delivered another boy, this one with bright red hair that surprised them both until Thomas remembered his grandmother had been a redhead. They named him James, and he proved to be a handful from the start, more energetic than Daniel had been, more demanding than Sarah. But he was also affectionate and funny, keeping them all entertained with his antics. Daniel was 10 now, old enough to be a real help around the ranch, and Sarah adored her new baby brother, always wanting to help care for him. The house was chaotic and loud and messy, and Thomas loved every minute of it. He would come in from a long day working the cattle to find Delilah cooking dinner with James tied to her back in a sling, Sarah setting the table while chattering about something she had learned, and Daniel eagerly telling him about the work he had done that day. It was everything he had never let himself dream of during those lonely years before Delilah. One day, when James was about 2 years old, Thomas was in town and overheard some men talking at the general store. They were discussing a woman who had killed her husband back east and fled west, supposedly ending up somewhere in Nebraska. The description was vague enough that it could have been anyone, but Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. He knew it was Delilah they were talking about, even though Robert's death had been ruled accidental by the authorities years ago. He hurried home, debating whether to tell Delilah about the conversation. He did not want to frighten her, not after all these years of peace and safety. But he also did not want her to be caught off guard if someone started asking questions. In the end, he decided honesty was best. They had built their marriage on trust and openness, and he would not start hiding things from her now. That evening, after the children were in bed, he told her what he had heard. Delilah went pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. After all this time, why would anyone care now? I do not think anyone is actively looking for you, Thomas reassured her. It was just gossip, old stories being rehashed, but I thought you should know, just in case. Delilah was quiet for a long moment, then she straightened her shoulders in that determined way Thomas had come to recognize. If someone does come asking questions, we will deal with it. I am not the same scared, desperate woman I was 7 years ago. I have a family now, a home, a life worth fighting for, and I have you beside me. I can face anything with you beside me. No one is going to take you away from us, Thomas said fiercely. I will make sure of that. But the worry gnawed at him over the following weeks. He found himself watching the road more carefully, his hand going to his gun when strangers approached. Delilah noticed his tension and tried to reassure him, but he could see she was worried too, that old fear creeping back into her eyes. The crisis came, as these things often do, unexpectedly. Thomas was out with the cattle when a rider approached the house. Delilah was alone with the children, Thomas having sent his ranch hands to work a distant section of the property. The man dismounted and knocked on the door, and when Delilah answered, her heart nearly stopped. He was a marshal, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. "Afternoon, madam. I am looking for a Thomas Everett. Is this his ranch?" "It is," Delilah said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "He is out with the cattle. Can I help you?" The marshal studied her face carefully, and Delilah felt like he was looking right through her. "Maybe you can. I am investigating an old case. A woman named Delilah Lawson who went missing from a wagon train back in 1873. Her husband, Robert Lawson, was found dead. The authorities ruled it accidental at the time, but new evidence has come to light that suggests maybe it was not so accidental. You would not happen to know anything about that, would you, Mrs. Everett? Delilah's mind raced. She could lie, claim ignorance, send him away. But she was tired of running, tired of fear. And she had Thomas now, and the law on her side in ways she had not back then. She lifted her chin and met the marshal's eyes directly. "I know quite a bit about it, actually. Delilah Lawson is my maiden name. I am the woman you are looking for." The marshal's hand moved toward his gun, and Delilah held up her hands. "I am not going to run, and I am not going to resist. But I would like to tell you my side of the story before you make any decisions about what happens next. Will you give me that much?" The marshal hesitated, then nodded. "All right, I will hear you out." Delilah invited him inside, called for Sarah to watch James and keep him out of the way, and poured the marshal coffee while she told him everything. She held nothing back, describing Robert's brutality, the beatings, the night he tried to kill her. She showed him scars on her arms and back from where Robert had hurt her over the months of their marriage. She explained how she had fought for her life and run, not knowing if Robert had survived. "I ended up here," she concluded, "hiding in Mr. Everett's stable, desperate and scared. He took me in, gave me work, and eventually we fell in love and married. I have been Delilah Everett for 6 years now. I have 3 children. I have built a life here, and I am not sorry for defending myself against a man who was trying to kill me." The marshal was quiet for a long time, sipping his coffee and studying her. Finally, he said, "You know the law does not look kindly on women who kill their husbands, even in self-defense." "I know," Delilah said, "but I also know I had a right to defend my life. Robert would have killed me that night. I had bruises and scars to prove how he had treated me. There were people on that wagon train who saw what he did to me, heard me crying. If you look into it, you will find the truth of who Robert Lawson was." "I already did," the marshal said, surprising her. "That is why I am here. We found testimony from several people who traveled with your wagon train. They all said the same thing, that Robert Lawson was brutal to you, that they heard him hitting you at night, that you were covered in bruises. One woman said she tried to intervene once, and Robert threatened to shoot her. The evidence is clear that you were abused, Mrs. Everett. The question is whether killing him was truly self-defense or something more." At that moment, Thomas burst through the door, having seen the marshal's horse and ridden back at a full gallop. He took in the scene, Delilah sitting at the table with the marshal, and immediately moved to his wife's side. "What is going on here?" "This is Marshal William Carson," Delilah said calmly. "He is investigating Robert's death. I have told him everything, Thomas, the truth of what happened that night." Thomas put his hand on Delilah's shoulder, protective and supportive. "My wife acted in self-defense. If you are here to arrest her, you will have to go through me." "I am not here to arrest anyone," the marshal said. "I am here to close a case. Based on the evidence I have gathered, including testimony from multiple witnesses about Robert Lawson's violent behavior, I am ruling his death as justifiable homicide in self-defense. Mrs. Everett, you are not going to face any charges. The matter is closed." Delilah felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "What? But I thought you were here to take me away." "I was sent to investigate," the marshal said, "and I have investigated. Robert Lawson was a violent man who abused his wife. When he tried to kill her, she defended herself. That is not murder. That is survival. You are free, Mrs. Everett. You can stop looking over your shoulder now." Tears streamed down Delilah's face as the weight of 7 years of fear lifted all at once. Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while she sobbed against his chest. The marshal finished his coffee, tipped his hat, and let himself out, closing the door quietly behind him. When Delilah finally composed herself, she looked up at Thomas with red, swollen eyes. "It is really over. After all this time, it is finally over." "You are free," Thomas said, cupping her face gently. "Completely, officially free, no more fear, no more hiding, just our life together, nothing hanging over your head." That night they celebrated quietly. Thomas opened a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion, and they toasted to new beginnings, to freedom, to the life they had built and would continue building. The children sensed something important had happened and were extra affectionate, climbing all over their parents until bedtime. Later, as they lay in bed together, Delilah turned to Thomas. "I cannot believe it is really over. For so long, I lived with that fear in the back of my mind, worried that someday someone would come and take me away from you and the children. And now, I do not have to be afraid anymore." "You never had to be afraid," Thomas said. "I would never have let anyone take you. But I am glad you have official closure now. You deserve that peace." "I would not have any of this without you," Delilah said softly. "If you had turned me away that night, if you had not shown me kindness when I was at my most desperate, I would probably be dead by now. You saved me, Thomas. In every way a person can be saved. And you saved me right back," he replied. "I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions of living but not really alive. You gave me purpose and love and a family. We saved each other, Delilah. That is what love does." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but always underpinned by the solid foundation of love and trust they had built. Daniel grew into a fine young man, taking on more responsibility around the ranch and showing a natural talent for working with horses. Sarah developed her mother's head for business and started helping with the ranch accounts and planning. James, the surprise redhead, turned out to have a gift for charming people and became invaluable when it came to negotiating cattle sales. When Thomas turned 50, the children threw him a surprise party that half the county attended. He stood on his porch looking out at all the people who had come to celebrate with him, and marveled at how full his life had become. Delilah stood beside him, her hair now streaked with gray, laugh lines around her eyes, still as beautiful to him as the day he found her in his stable. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, linking her arm through his. "I am thinking about that night," he said. "November of 1873. The night that changed everything. I keep wondering what would have happened if I had made a different choice that night, if I had sent you away or turned you into the authorities. Where would we both be now? Probably alone and miserable," Delilah said. "I certainly would not have all this. This family, this home, this love. Everything good in my life came from you taking a chance on a desperate stranger. And everything good in my life came from that stranger asking for just one more night," Thomas replied. He turned to her, taking both her hands. "I have never regretted a single moment of the life we have built together, Delilah. Not 1 second. Neither have I," she said. "Even the hard parts were worth it because we faced them together." They kissed then, in full view of their guests and children and neighbors, a kiss that held decades of love and partnership and unwavering commitment. People cheered and whistled, and Thomas laughed against Delilah's lips, feeling like the luckiest man alive. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset. Daniel stood with his arm around his sweetheart, a girl from town he planned to marry next spring. Sarah held baby James's hand while he dozed against her shoulder, exhausted from all the excitement. Thomas and Delilah sat in their rocking chairs, the chairs they had sat in countless times over the years, watching their family and their land with deep contentment. "Tell us the story again," Sarah said suddenly, "about how you met. It is Papa's birthday, so he should get to hear his favorite story." Daniel groaned good-naturedly. "We have heard it 100 times, Sarah. I do not care. I want to hear it again. Besides, someday I am going to tell my children, and I want to make sure I have all the details right." Thomas and Delilah exchanged smiles. They had told this story many times over the years, at family gatherings and to curious friends, polishing it until it shone like a jewel. But they never tired of it because it was their story, the foundation everything else was built on. "It was November of 1873, Thomas began, as he always did. "One of those cold nights where the wind cuts right through you. I went to check on the horses before bed, and when I opened the stable door, there was a woman sleeping in the hay. She looked half dead, covered in bruises and dirt, and I thought for a moment she might actually be gone. But then I saw her breathing, just barely. And when you woke me," Delilah continued, picking up the story seamlessly as she always did, "I was so scared. I thought you were going to hurt me or turn me in or send me back out into the cold to die. But instead you looked at me with kind eyes, and when I asked if I could stay just one more night, you said yes. You could have said no. Any reasonable person would have said no, but you took a chance on me. Best decision I ever made," Thomas said, reaching over to take her hand. "That one night turned into forever, and I would not change a single thing about it." Sarah sighed happily, always a romantic at heart. "I hope I find someone who looks at me the way Papa looks at Mama." "You will," Delilah assured her. "When you meet the right person, you will know. It might not be dramatic or obvious at first, but you will feel it, that sense of coming home, of being exactly where you are supposed to be." As darkness fell and the children drifted off to bed, Thomas and Delilah remained on the porch, as had become their habit over the years. The ranch was quiet now, peaceful, with just the sounds of crickets and the occasional low of cattle in the distance. Stars emerged overhead, brilliant and countless in the clear Nebraska sky. You ever miss those early days? Thomas asked. When it was just the two of us, before the children and all the responsibility. Delilah considered the question carefully. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, but I would not trade what we have now for anything. This life, this family, it is everything I dreamed of when I was hiding in your stable, too scared to hope for a future. We built something beautiful, Thomas, something that will last beyond us. It will last because we made it strong, Thomas agreed. Built it on honesty and trust, and choosing each other every single day, even when it was hard. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. After all these years, they could still sit together without needing words, could communicate in glances and touches and shared silence. It was the kind of intimacy that came only from decades of partnership, from weathering storms together and celebrating triumphs side by side. "Thank you," Delilah said softly, breaking the silence, "for everything, for that first night, for every night since, for building this life with me, for loving me when I thought I would never be able to trust love again. Thank you, Thomas." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for asking for just one more night. Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing me in this life. I love you, Delilah. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," she replied, "always and forever." They remained on the porch until the night grew too cold, until Delilah's head was resting on Thomas's shoulder and his arm was wrapped around her waist. Two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and built something luminous from the ashes of despair. When they finally went inside, it was together as they did everything, two halves of a whole that had been forged in a stable on a cold November night years ago. The ranch continued to thrive under their stewardship. Daniel eventually took over most of the day-to-day operations, leaving Thomas more time to enjoy his grandchildren as they started arriving. Sarah married a good man, a teacher from back east, and they settled in Fort Kearney, close enough to visit often but far enough to have their own lives. James surprised everyone by showing an interest in law and went off to study, though he promised to always come home to the ranch where he belonged. Thomas and Delilah grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands becoming gnarled with age and hard work, their faces mapping the years in lines and creases. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deeper, more essential as the years passed. They knew each other completely, knew every scar and every story, every fear and every dream. They had built a life together brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice, and the result was something unshakable. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Delilah back to the stable where he had found her all those years ago. It had been rebuilt since then, expanded and improved, but it was still the same structure at its core. They stood in the stall where she had been sleeping, now home to a gentle mare, and remembered. "I was so scared that night," Delilah said, looking around. "I thought my life was over. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. I was alone and terrified and ready to give up." "But you did not give up," Thomas reminded her. "You asked for one more night. You fought for one more chance. And that courage, that refusal to surrender, that is what I fell in love with. That is what I see in you still, every single day." "We have had a good life," Delilah said, turning to face him. "Better than I ever imagined possible. Thank you for giving me that first night, and thank you for giving me all the nights that came after." Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her close in the place where their story began. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you every single time, Delilah, in this life and any other." They kissed there in the stable, surrounded by the smell of hay and horses, their love as strong and true as it had been on their wedding day, perhaps even stronger for having been tested and proven over decades. When they finally pulled apart, both of them had tears in their eyes, but they were happy tears, grateful tears. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, the sun setting behind them in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas felt profound gratitude for the path his life had taken. For the war that had brought him to Nebraska, for the loneliness that had made him receptive to companionship, for the November wind that had sent him to check the stable that particular night. Every choice, every circumstance, every moment had led him to Delilah, and she had led him to this life, this family, this love that defined him. "I am glad you asked for just one more night," he told her as they reached the porch. "It was the best request anyone has ever made of me." "And I am glad you said yes," Delilah replied, squeezing his hand. "It was the best answer I have ever received." They went inside together, into the warm house filled with the memories of decades, into the life they had built from nothing but courage and kindness and love. Behind them, the stable stood silent in the gathering darkness, holding its secrets and its history, the place where a rancher had found a desperate woman and chosen compassion over convenience, and where that simple choice had blossomed into a love story for the ages. The years continued their steady march, bringing both joy and sorrow as life inevitably does. Thomas and Delilah became great-grandparents, their family tree spreading wide and strong. They attended weddings and christenings, celebrated successes, and comforted through failures. They were the foundation everyone else built on, the example of what love and commitment could accomplish. When Thomas turned 70, his health began to fail. Nothing dramatic, just the slow decline of a body that had worked hard for decades. Delilah nursed him with the same fierce devotion she brought to everything, refusing to let him give up, encouraging him to keep fighting. The children visited often, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren to brighten his days. One evening, as they sat together in their room, Thomas looked at Delilah with eyes still bright despite his failing body. "I need you to know something," he said, his voice weaker than it used to be but still steady. "If I had only one night of my life to live over again, it would be that night. The night I found you in the stable, because that was the night my real life began." Delilah took his hand, tears streaming down her weathered face. "And if I had only one night, it would be the same. The night you showed me kindness when I desperately needed it, the night that led to all of this." "I love you," Thomas said. "I have loved you since that first night, even though I did not know it yet, and I will love you beyond this life into whatever comes next." "I love you too," Delilah whispered. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for every single day we have had together." Thomas lived another 5 years, each day a gift they both treasured. And when he finally passed peacefully in his sleep at 75, with Delilah holding his hand and their children gathered around, his last words were, "Just one more night turned into forever. Best deal I ever made." Delilah mourned him deeply, but took comfort in the life they had built, in the family that surrounded her, in the love that had sustained them both through everything. She lived another 10 years, spending her days with children and grandchildren, telling and retelling the story of the rancher who found her sleeping in his stable and the desperate plea that changed both their lives forever. When she passed, quietly and without pain at 87, she was buried next to Thomas under the big oak tree on the ranch, their graves side by side as they had been in life. The headstones were simple, but bore an inscription that told their story. Just one more night turned into forever. The ranch passed to Daniel and his descendants, and they kept it thriving, always remembering the foundation Thomas and Delilah had laid. The story of how their grandparents met became family legend, told to each new generation as an example of courage, kindness, and the transformative power of love. The old stable still stood, preserved carefully, a reminder of where it all began, of the night a desperate woman asked for mercy and a lonely rancher chose compassion, and how that single moment of grace had rippled outward to create something beautiful and lasting. And so the legacy of that November night in 1873 lived on, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the ranch that still bore the Everett name, in the love story that had started with a simple plea. Please, just one more night. It had been enough, more than enough. It had been the beginning of everything that mattered, the foundation of a love that transcended time and death, proving that sometimes the bravest thing is to ask for help, and the most powerful thing is to offer it freely. Thomas and Delilah's story became a testament to both, a reminder that even in the hardest times, kindness and courage can create miracles.